Why did she feel more nervous in a quiet restaurant than she ever had on the battlefield? Sarah Martinez sat in the dim glow of the small Italian place on Fifth Avenue, her posture straight, her breathing steady, her hands carefully folded around a glass of wine. To anyone glancing her way, she looked like just another woman having dinner alone, dressed in civilian clothes, a soft blouse instead of a uniform, jeans instead of fatigues. But behind her calm exterior, something deeper churned. She had fought through 3 deployments. She had survived ambushes, roadside bombs, nights of unbearable heat and silence broken only by gunfire. Yet tonight, her first real evening out since coming home, her chest tightened in ways she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the strangeness of being back among people who had no idea what she'd endured. Maybe it was the sudden, dizzying freedom of not wearing rank on her shoulder. Or maybe it was the simple, fragile desire to just be ordinary. She hadn't felt ordinary in years. The waiter, Mike, a college kid with a nervous smile, brought her pasta and a refill of wine. She thanked him quietly, almost shyly. She wasn't used to being served without suspicion, without a sidearm resting on her thigh, without sand filling her boots. She caught herself smiling as she tasted the food, real food, not rations reheated under a desert sun. For a moment, she let herself relax. But habits built in war never died easily. Her eyes scanned the room, families laughing, couples leaning close, businessmen arguing over contracts. She told herself not to do it, not tonight. No threat assessments, no mental maps of exits, no calculation of who might draw a weapon first. But the instincts ran deep and they whispered anyway. Then the door opened. 5 men entered, loud before they even crossed the threshold. Expensive clothes, drunk swagger, the kind of arrogance that only comes from privilege and too much liquor. They cut through the restaurant's calm atmosphere like a blade. The hostess led them to a table near the center, but their voices carried everywhere. Laughter sharp, words vulgar, jokes crude enough to make parents shift uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah noticed the way one mother covered her daughter's ears. She noticed the waiter stiffen. She noticed the owner, an older Italian man with tired eyes, pause in the corner, unsure how to handle the disruption. She told herself to ignore it. Just eat, just breathe. Just be Sarah, not Petty Officer Martinez. But her shoulders tightened again. The men got louder, snapping fingers for service, sending back plates just to prove they could. Their carelessness filled the room. The diners tried to pretend nothing was wrong, forks clinking against plates in forced rhythm, but unease spread like a quiet disease. When Sarah felt their eyes on her, she knew where the night was heading. They'd noticed her, alone. Their whispers weren't whispers at all, comments about her body, the shape of her face, the fact she was sitting without a man beside her. Their laughter dripped with challenge, like they wanted her to hear, like they wanted her to flinch. She didn't, not yet. Instead, she scrolled her phone, forcing herself to smile at old deployment photos. Brothers and sisters in uniform, some still overseas, some adjusting to civilian life just like her. She lingered on their faces, remembering laughter in the middle of nowhere, shared fear under mortar fire, the kind of bond civilians would never understand. The noise grew sharper. A chair scraped. A tall blond man with too much whiskey in his step passed her table on the way to the restroom. He brushed against her chair, deliberately, and leaned down with words too crude to repeat. Sarah didn't move. She just looked up, eyes steady, voice calm. "Keep moving." It was polite, firm, final. But to him, it was a challenge. He stopped. His friends stood, and the restaurant shifted. Forks froze. Conversations died. All the quiet background hum of ordinary life faded into the tension gathering around her table. The blonde leaned closer, breath hot with alcohol, voice mocking. "What you say to me?" Her muscles coiled. Not out of fear, fear had left her long ago, but out of readiness. The 4 others circled, closing off her exit. Big men, careless grins, the kind of group that fed on each other's arrogance. The owner hurried over, his voice shaky, trying to intervene. They laughed him off. The waiter tried too, trembling but brave. They mocked him, called him a kid, promised he couldn't stop what was about to happen. Sarah rose slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her voice remained level. "I don't want trouble, go back to your table. I'll finish my dinner quietly." It was an out, a lifeline, a last chance to walk away. But drunk pride never took lifelines. The blond smirked. His friends tightened the circle. Families shifted nervously, children clutched by anxious mothers. Someone whispered about calling 911. A phone camera went up, shaky hands recording. Sarah measured the space, the exits, the weight of every body around her. 5 men, larger than her. Civilian setting. Innocent bystanders nearby. No weapons on her, only skill, instinct, training honed across years of war. Her voice dropped, low and sharp. "You don't want to do this." They laughed. The blonde reached out for her wrist. And time broke open. Her hand shot up, caught his wrist, twisted. His body buckled. In a blink he was on his knees, his breath leaving him in a gasp of pain. Before his friends could react, she moved, fluid, efficient, a dance written into her muscles by endless drills and survival. One man lunged. She turned his momentum against him, sent him crashing into plates and glass. The restaurant gasped. Another came from her left. She pivoted, dropped him face down, her knee pressed firm between his shoulder blades. "Stay down," she ordered, her voice like steel. The last two froze, hesitation cracking their bravado, but alcohol and pride pushed them forward anyway. They tried to flank her. She stepped back against the wall, cut their angle, forced them into her space where she had the advantage. They struck. She answered. 10 seconds later, they were on the ground, breathless, stunned, wondering how a woman half their size had dismantled them so completely. Silence. The restaurant was a frozen portrait. Diners starring, forks midair, phones recording, children peeking through fingers. And in the center, Sarah Martinez stood breathing steadily, eyes scanning the room like she had in combat zones, making sure no further threat remained. Her wine glass still stood on the table, untouched, unshaken. She smoothed her blouse, sat back down, lifted the glass and drank. Her hand didn't tremble. But inside something quivered, not fear, not regret, something harder to name. She hadn't wanted this. Not tonight. She wanted peace, silence, the feeling of being just another face in the city. Instead, war had followed her home in the shape of 5 drunk men who had no idea what kind of storm they had provoked. The blonde groaned, clutching his wrist. You broke it." "It's sprained," Sarah said flatly, "and I warned you." Phones captured every word. The waiter whispered into his phone, breathless. "Yes, 911. 5 men. They attacked her. She's military. Navy, I think. They're all down. Yeah, all of them." Around her, whispers rose. "Who is she? Did you see that? She took them apart in seconds." Sarah didn't answer their questions. She sat in her corner, silent, wine glass steady, the adrenaline still humming in her blood. And she wondered, was this what homecoming would always be? A battlefield hiding in ordinary places. She had wanted anonymity, but the moment she moved, that possibility was gone. Why did the silence feel heavier than the fight itself? The restaurant remained frozen, as if no one dared even to breathe too loudly. The clinking of glassware, the chatter of families, the hum of normal life, all of it had evaporated, leaving only the sound of groans from the men sprawled on the floor. Sarah sat calmly, but her heart pounded with the rhythm of combat adrenaline. She hated that familiar edge, the way her body betrayed her craving for peace by falling back into survival mode. It wasn't fear. It was readiness, the kind that took years of war to carve into bone and muscle. She wanted to disappear, to melt back into the quiet anonymity she'd sought when she chose this place for dinner. But that was impossible now. Eyes were locked on her from every direction. phones pointed, and no matter how badly she wished to remain invisible, her actions had dragged her into the center of the room, into the center of every conversation that would follow. The blond man, face flushed with alcohol and pain, cradled his wrist and glared at her. You're insane. You'll pay for this." His voice trembled, not with strength but with the faltering pride of someone who had already lost. Sarah didn't even look at him. "Sit down, stay down." A ripple of whispers carried across the room. Parents comforted their children. Couples leaned close, their voices hushed, their eyes wide. An older man, his hair gray, his posture still proud, stood and gave Sarah a nod, the kind only a fellow veteran would recognize. Respect. Recognition. The owner, Jep, approached again. His hands shook, but his eyes glowed with something Sarah hadn't expected: gratitude. "Señorita, you saved my restaurant. You." His words stumbled into Italian, his emotions too raw for English. He gestured wildly at the scene. The 5 men scattered like broken chairs, the untouched woman at the table, the families still safe. Sarah simply lifted her glass. "It's over." But was it? Sirens grew in the distance. A reminder that in civilian life, conflicts didn't end with the last blow. They ended with questions, reports, judgments. And Sarah knew all too well how quickly narratives twisted. The waiter, Mike, stood near the door, still clutching his phone, his voice urgent. "Yeah, hurry, please. They tried to attack her, she defended herself. It's all on video. Everyone saw it. Please, just send someone fast." The men on the floor shifted restlessly, their bravado shriveled but not gone. One whispered to another, "We'll say she hit us first." Another muttered, "They'll believe us. Look at her. Just one woman, 5 of us." Sarah heard them. She always heard everything. She stood slow and deliberate, the wine glass set down with care. The room stiffened as she walked to the center of the chaos, the place where 5 men had thought they would break her. Now it was their cage. She took out her phone, snapping quick pictures of their faces, their postures, the overturned tables. Evidence. Not anger, just discipline. Her voice cut through the air, calm and steady. "Sit still. The police will be here in minutes, and you will answer for what you did." The bearded one sneered, blood trickling from a small cut on his forehead. "What are you, a cop?" She looked down at him, her shadow cast long over his slouched body. "United States Navy, Special Operations, 3 deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan. I came home 3 weeks ago." The words weren't boastful, they weren't loud, they were matter of fact, a soldier stating her position, but the effect on the room was seismic. Murmurs rose instantly, families nodding, veterans in the corner sitting taller. Even the children looked at her differently. The truth had broken open. She wasn't just a woman who fought off 5 men. She was someone trained, tested, forged in places most people only saw in news headlines. The blond muttered, his confidence cracking further. We didn't know." Sarah's gaze pinned him, cold, unforgiving. It wouldn't have mattered. The restaurant doors burst open. 6 police officers entered, weapons drawn, scanning the scene. What they saw was bizarre. 5 men battered and groaning on the floor, and one calm woman standing tall, composed, wine still cooling at her table. Sarah raised her hand slightly, a gesture of control and respect. "Officers," she said, her voice clear. "Petty Officer First Class Sarah Martinez, United States Navy. These men assaulted me. I defended myself using necessary force." The sergeant in front, a broad-shouldered man with eyes that had seen his own share of battles, looked at her posture, her bearing, the quiet command in her tone. He holstered his weapon. "Understood, ma'am. We'll need statements." The shift was instant. The other officers followed suit, securing the scene, speaking with witnesses, moving with urgency but not alarm. Sarah sat again, this time out of discipline, not weariness. She gave her account the way she'd given debriefs countless times before, clear, chronological, professional. She described the men's entrance, their behavior, the escalation, her warnings, and the moment they forced her hand. She left nothing out. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She told it like it was. One by one, witnesses confirmed her story. Jep, Mike, the mother with her daughter, the older veteran, families, couples. Every voice painted the same picture: 5 drunk aggressors cornering a woman who had asked to be left alone. And all of it, every detail, was backed by the restaurant's cameras, already handed over by Jep with a flourish of relief. The men tried their lies. They claimed she'd started it. They insisted they just wanted to talk, but their contradictions tangled and their arrogance collapsed beneath the weight of evidence. The blond man, still holding his wrist, snarled through his teeth, "She ruined my life." Sarah looked at him once more, her expression unreadable. "You ruined your own." The words struck harder than her blows had. Paramedics arrived, tending to the attackers. Scrapes, bruises, a sprained wrist, nothing more. Sarah had been precise, surgical. She had given them pain but not destruction. Detective Lisa Rodriguez arrived soon after, her presence steady, her eyes sharp. She listened to Sarah's statement, nodding. 3 deployments. "Yes, ma'am." "Then you know restraint, and you showed it tonight." Sarah gave no answer. Her silence was its own acknowledgement. Outside, the flashing patrol lights painted the street in red and blue. Inside, the restaurant slowly began to breathe again. Forks lifted. Conversations restarted, but they were different now. Softer, more careful. Every pair of eyes carried respect, gratitude, a silent understanding that they had been inches from danger, and this woman, this stranger, had stood between them and chaos. Jep brought her another glass of wine, refusing her payment. His voice cracked as he spoke. "For you, everything tonight is free. You have honored my restaurant." Sarah wanted to smile, but she didn't, not fully. She only lifted the glass, a quiet nod. Because inside her, something heavy stirred. She had fought off 5 men in 15 seconds, but what lingered wasn't pride. It was the question she couldn't shake. If even a quiet dinner in San Diego turned into a battlefield, where then was home? How fast could a quiet night turn into a story the whole city couldn't stop talking about? By morning, the answer was clear. The videos spread like wildfire. Shaky footage from cell phones captured every second: the circle of men, the flash of Sarah's movements, the way 5 bodies fell in the span of 15 seconds. The internet ate it alive. Hashtags bloomed. Headlines shouted, "Navy veteran defends herself against 5 men." News anchors replayed the footage in loops, voices filled with awe. Sarah Martinez had wanted one peaceful dinner. Instead, she woke to find herself on every screen in America. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Old Navy comrades texting her, "That's you, isn't it?" Messages from strangers, "Thank you for your service." Journalists pleading for interviews. Some called her a hero. Others called her dangerous. A few accused her of showing off. She ignored them all. What none of them understood was that she hadn't fought for attention. She hadn't fought to prove anything. She had fought because she had no choice. Because 5 men had cornered her and walking away wasn't an option. But the world didn't care about her reasons. It cared about the story. At the restaurant, Jep was overwhelmed. His phone rang constantly. Reporters lined the sidewalk, eager to stand in front of his sign, to point to the corner table where Sarah had sat. Business boomed overnight. Reservations filled for weeks. Customers asked to sit where she had eaten, as though the wood of the table held some trace of her strength. Jep leaned into it, proud in his own way. He hung a photo of Sarah in uniform, taken from her social media after she reluctantly agreed to let him. Underneath it, a plaque, "Reserved for Heroes." Sarah hated it. She walked in once after the incident, hood up, hopping for anonymity. Instead, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. People clapped, some stood, a few even saluted. She wanted to disappear into the floor. She wasn't built for fame. She was built for discipline, for action, for silence when silence mattered most. But fame didn't ask what you wanted. Detective Lisa Rodriguez called her a week later. Her voice carried a professional calm. "Sarah, I thought you'd want an update. All 5 men took plea deals. Assault, disturbing the peace, public intoxication, jail time, fines, counseling. The evidence was airtight." Sarah said nothing for a moment, then asked softly, "And the cameras? All of it was submitted?" "Every angle, every second. You handled yourself with restraint. That'll matter in the record. Honestly, I wish more cases ended this clean." Sarah thanked her, then hung up. She should have felt relief. Instead, there was only a hollow ache. She thought of the blond man's face when his wrist bent under her grip. She remembered the bearded man crashing into glass. She remembered the children in the corner, eyes wide with fear. She hadn't wanted to be a soldier that night, but she had been forced into it, and she couldn't escape the guilt that even in peace, her life defaulted back to combat. The community wanted to celebrate her. Veterans groups reached out. Local officials planned ceremonies. Schools asked her to speak. Jep announced he would donate part of his profits to veterans' charities in her honor. Everywhere she went, someone recognized her. "Are you the woman from the video? Can I shake your hand? My son wants to join the Navy now, thanks to you." She smiled politely, but inside she wrestled with something no one else could see. Because for every thank you, every cheer, every headline, she felt the same question gnaw at her. Why did it take violence for them to notice me? For 18 months overseas, she had lived in shadows, serving without applause. She had returned home quiet, wanting only peace. Yet only when the cameras caught her breaking 5 men in 15 seconds did the world look at her, finally see her. It felt wrong. At night she couldn't sleep. The applause haunted her more than the fight itself. She dreamed of being surrounded, cornered, unable to blend in. Always being seen as the Navy woman instead of Sarah. Always the soldier, never the person. One evening, weeks after the incident, Jep approached her with something in his hands. A photo of himself as a young man in uniform, standing straight, eyes proud. He pressed it into her palms. "My grandfather gave me this," he said softly. "He told me, the strongest people are not those who show strength in front of us, but those who win battles we know nothing about. I want you to have it." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "I can't take this." "You must," Jep insisted. "Because you reminded me of it that night. You fought, yes, but more than that you chose restraint. That is harder, that is rarer." She held the frame against her chest. For the first time in weeks, tears burned behind her eyes. Still, she said little. She had learned long ago that silence often spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, the men she had fought faced the fallout. The blond one, Kevin Thompson, lost his job at a prestigious law firm once the video went viral. His face was too recognizable now, his arrogance too public. The others faced similar disgrace, careers halted, reputations ruined. Some issued apologies. Kevin himself eventually wrote one for the local paper, admitting his actions, thanking Sarah for her restraint. Sarah read it once, folded it, and tucked it into a drawer. The world saw a victory, justice served, a hero celebrated. But Sarah didn't see victory. She saw a reminder. That war never truly stayed overseas. That battles followed you home in unexpected forms. That sometimes, no matter how much you wanted to disappear into ordinary life, your past and your training would rise the moment you were threatened. She longed for peace, but peace, it seemed, still kept its distance. And yet, through the attention, through the applause, through the endless retellings of the 15 seconds, something unexpected began to happen. Other veterans reached out, men and women she'd served with, strangers she'd never met. They wrote her messages not about the fight but about the struggle after, the nights of restlessness, the weight of coming home to a world that didn't understand, the ache of trying to belong. And for the first time, Sarah didn't feel so alone. Maybe that was the lesson buried beneath the noise. Maybe the fight hadn't been about proving herself or punishing arrogance. Maybe it had been about opening a door she hadn't realized others were waiting at. Still, she wondered. When the applause faded, when the headlines shifted, would anyone still see her as Sarah? Or would she always be the 15 seconds in the restaurant? Her glass of wine stood half empty on the table as she stared out the window at the quiet San Diego night. A city full of strangers. A city that had turned her into a symbol. But symbols were heavy. And Sarah Martinez, combat veteran, decorated operator, reluctant hero, was still just a woman trying to find her way home. Why did applause feel heavier than combat gear? Weeks after the restaurant, Sarah found herself standing at the front of a crowded room, her name echoing through a microphone she hadn't asked for. The city had insisted on a ceremony. The mayor had insisted on speeches. Veterans, groups had insisted on attendance. And Sarah had reluctantly agreed. The hall was decorated with flags, banners, and photographs from local service members. Rows of folding chairs were filled with people, officials in suits, veterans in caps, families clutching small flags. The air buzzed with expectation, all of it focused on her. The mayor spoke first. His words were polished, his smile wide. Petty Officer First Class Sarah Martinez, a woman who reminded us all that courage doesn't end when the uniform comes off. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Sarah stood rigid, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. Years of military bearing kept her posture perfect, but inside, her stomach churned. She didn't want this spotlight. She didn't want her 15 seconds of forced violence to define her entire life. But here she was. Detective Rodriguez spoke next, her voice measured, respectful. What impressed me most wasn't how fast Sarah handled 5 attackers. It was her restraint. She could have hurt them far worse, but she chose precision. She chose control. That kind of discipline saves lives, not just in combat, but here, in our community. More applause, louder this time. When it was her turn, Sarah approached the podium slowly. The microphone stood taller than she expected, and for a moment she just looked out over the sea of faces. They waited, phones raised, eyes bright. She cleared her throat. I didn't ask for this. A murmur swept the room. She continued. I didn't ask for 5 men to corner me that night. I didn't ask to be recorded. I didn't ask to be called a hero. Her voice didn't shake. It was steady, the same voice she'd used giving orders in the field. But beneath it, emotion pulsed like a hidden current. What I did was simple. I defended myself. I defended the people around me, that's it. I don't think that makes me extraordinary. I think it makes me human. The room was silent now. Even the cameras stopped clicking. I served 3 deployments overseas. I saw men and women do things you'll never hear about, things braver, harder, more selfless than what I did in that restaurant. Most of them never got applause. Some of them never came home. If you want to call someone a hero, call them. Her eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on the veterans, the ones who nodded slowly, understanding. She stepped back, finished, leaving the podium without waiting for applause. But the applause came anyway. It thundered. It rose like a wave, unstoppable. And Sarah hated it. Because it wasn't for the people she wanted remembered. It was for the 15 seconds that she wished had never happened. Later, as the mayor presented her with a ceremonial key to the city, she forced a polite smile. Cameras captured it. Headlines would celebrate it. But inside, she thought only of her comrades. The ones who had stood in sand and heat, not marble and microphones. The ones who would never hear applause again. Afterward, Jep found her. He had closed his restaurant for the day to attend. In his hands, he carried a small envelope. For you, he said softly, pressing it into her palm. Inside was a note, written in shaky English but with unmistakable sincerity. You made us safe. You showed my daughter what strength looks like. You are part of our family now. Signed simply, a mother and daughter. Sarah held the paper tightly, her throat thick. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was this. the quiet gratitude of strangers who had felt fear, then safety. That night, alone in her apartment, she laid the note beside the framed photo Jep had given her. Two small tokens, two reminders that sometimes the weight of recognition wasn't about glory, it was about connection. But the requests kept coming. More ceremonies, more interviews. Schools wanted her to speak about courage. Corporations invited her to events, hoping her presence would inspire employees. Every time she said no, the pressure grew. Every time she said yes, the emptiness deepened. Because each time she stood before a crowd, she felt further from the peace she had been searching for since coming home. One evening, after yet another gathering where she was asked to tell the story, Sarah walked alone down the San Diego pier. The ocean stretched dark and endless. The waves whispered against the wood. The city lights blinked in the distance. She leaned on the railing, breathing deep. Salt air filled her lungs, cool and sharp. For the first time that day, no one asked for her picture. No one clapped. No one called her a hero. It was quiet. And in the quiet, she whispered to herself, "I just wanted dinner." Her words vanished into the sea breeze, but in that moment she realized something. Maybe she couldn't control the story anymore. Maybe she couldn't stop people from calling her a hero or from replaying her 15 seconds over and over. But she could control who she was when the noise faded. Not just the soldier, not just the fighter, not just the woman in the viral video. Sarah Martinez, a person, a survivor, a woman learning to live again. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Why was it easier to fight wars overseas than to find peace at home? 3 months had passed since the restaurant. 3 months since a single night had changed the way everyone looked at her. For some, she was the Navy veteran who dismantled 5 men in seconds. For others, she was a local hero, a symbol of resilience. But for Sarah, she was still just a woman trying to breathe without hearing the echo of combat in every silence. Civilian life had begun to settle into something that looked like routine. She had accepted a position as a security consultant for a large corporation, a job offered to her almost immediately after the video went viral. Her resume had already been strong, but now, with the weight of her sudden fame, executives had lined up to bring her in. It was good work, structured, familiar in some ways. She trained employees on safety protocols, advised on building security, ran drills that simulated emergencies. She didn't carry a rifle anymore, but the instincts remained sharp. Planning, assessing, always scanning. But office hallways were not deserts. Boardrooms were not battlegrounds. And the shift from a world where life and death decisions hung on every choice to one where people complained about broken printers, it rattled her. Sometimes she caught herself laughing at the absurdity. Other times, the laughter never came. Her colleagues respected her, but they also watched her. She could see it in their eyes, curiosity, awe, maybe even fear. Some whispered when she passed. Others asked questions she didn't want to answer. Is it true you were in special operations? Did you really serve in Afghanistan? Was it as bad as they say? She gave them polite smiles. She offered short answers, but deep down she wished they would stop seeing her as the woman from the video. Stop seeing her as a soldier. Just see her as Sarah. At night she returned to Jep's restaurant sometimes. Not often, not for attention, just for quiet. Jep always greeted her warmly, always guided her to the same table, always insisted her meal was on the house. She protested, but he waved her off. "You are family here," he said every time. She didn't argue anymore. One Thursday evening she sat with her plate of pasta, letting the hum of the restaurant wash over her. Families laughing, couples talking softly, the clink of glasses, ordinary life, it soothed her. Until she overheard a table behind her. "That's her," a man whispered. "The Navy woman, the one who—" Sarah's fork paused in midair. She closed her eyes, breathing slow. No matter where she went, no matter how much time passed, the 15 seconds followed. The strangers never meant harm. They spoke with admiration, sometimes with gratitude, but each word chained her to a night she wanted to leave behind. She thought again of the question that haunted her. Why did it take violence for the world to see her? She finished her meal quickly, thanked Jep, and slipped out into the night. The streets of San Diego glowed with neon and traffic. She walked aimlessly, her thoughts heavier than the air. She passed bars where laughter spilled out onto sidewalks. She passed storefronts closing for the night. And finally, she stopped at the pier, where the ocean stretched endless under the moonlight. The waves rolled steady, rhythmic, unbothered by headlines or applause. Sarah leaned on the railing and let the salt air fill her lungs. Out here, she wasn't the woman from the video. She wasn't a soldier or a consultant. She was just a person standing against the wind. But even here, her mind wandered back to deployment nights when she had stood on foreign soil, staring at a different horizon, wondering if she'd ever make it home, to the faces of comrades she would never see again, to the silence that always followed battle. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the sound of the ocean became the sound of memory. The crunch of boots in sand, the radio crackling in clipped bursts, the sudden thunder of gunfire breaking stillness. She opened her eyes again, forcing the memories back where they belonged. This was supposed to be her new life, a life of peace, a life beyond war. But the past had claws, and it never let go easily. At work, her new boss praised her discipline. "You bring a perspective nobody else can," he told her after one training session. "You've lived real crises. That makes your lessons stick." She nodded, appreciating his respect, but part of her wanted to say, "I don't want to be defined by crises. I want to be defined by who I am without them." Instead, she carried on. She mentored younger employees, guided them patiently, taught them not just procedures but composure. She watched them learn, and sometimes she caught glimpses of something unexpected: hope. Maybe her experience, painful as it was, could help others feel safer. Maybe it wasn't just a chain, it was also a tool. Still, the weight pressed on her shoulders. One evening, she returned to her apartment, exhausted from another day of drills and stares. She set her bag down, poured a glass of water, and sat in the dark, letting silence surround her. On her table sat two items: the framed photo Jep had given her and the folded letter of apology from Kevin Thompson, the blonde attacker. She hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't forgiven him either, but it sat there, reminding her of something she couldn't quite put into words. Maybe people could change. Maybe mistakes could teach. Maybe even arrogance could learn humility. She didn't know if she believed it yet, but the thought lingered. The phone buzzed. Another message, another request. A veterans group asking her to speak at an event. This time she didn't delete it. She read it carefully. "We don't want you to tell the story of that night. We want you to tell the story of what came after, of how hard it is to come home. Our younger vets need to hear it from someone who understands." Sarah sat in the quiet, staring at the words. Maybe, just maybe, this was different. Not applause, not headlines, not 15 seconds. Something real, something human. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the choice settle. Then she whispered into the stillness. "Maybe it's time." Why was speaking into a microphone scarier than facing 5 men in a fight? Sarah stood backstage at a local community center, palms damp despite the calm mask she wore. Rows of folding chairs filled the hall beyond the curtain. Veterans of every age, young faces fresh from deployment, older ones carved by decades of memory, families, children holding small American flags. She hadn't wanted to do this. For weeks, she'd said no. But the message from the veterans group had struck something in her. Don't tell the story of that night. Tell the story of what came after. That was different, that mattered. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked out. The applause came immediately. She hated it, but this time she let it pass over her, let it fade. She stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was quiet at first. "Most of you already know my name. Most of you know the video." A ripple of laughter, uncomfortable but sympathetic. She gave a small nod, acknowledging the elephant in the room. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to talk about 15 seconds in a restaurant. I'm here to talk about everything after, because that's the part nobody sees. That's the battle most people don't understand." The room leaned forward. She paused, letting silence do its work. When you come home from deployment, people expect you to be relieved. They expect you to be happy, to feel free. But what they don't see is that the war doesn't end just because you step off a plane. It follows you, into your sleep, into your meals, into the quiet moments when you just want to breathe. Her voice grew steadier, carried by conviction. "For me, it followed me into a restaurant. It followed me when 5 drunk men thought I was easy prey. And when the world saw me fight back, it called me a hero. But what I want you to understand is, what happened that night wasn't strength. It was survival. And survival is different than peace." The veterans nodded slowly, some wiping at their eyes. "I struggled," Sarah continued. "Not with what I did that night, but with what it meant. Because suddenly everyone wanted me to be a symbol, and all I wanted was to be Sarah, just Sarah. Not Petty Officer Martinez, not the Navy woman, not the viral video." Her throat tightened, but she pushed through. "And I know I'm not alone in that. I know a lot of you here feel the same way. You come home, and people look at you like you're different. They either put you on a pedestal or they avoid you because they don't understand. Either way, they don't see you for who you really are. And that's the hardest part, being invisible and exposed at the same time." The hall was silent, every face locked on hers. "So I'm here to tell you it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to ask for help. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human." The applause came again, but this time it wasn't thunderous. It was steady, gentle, respectful, the kind that didn't demand attention but offered it. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her. Young veterans who whispered, "Thank you. That's exactly how I feel." Older ones who squeezed her hand, eyes wet with unspoken memories. Mothers who said, "Now I understand what my son is going through." And Sarah realized something. For the first time since she'd come home, she felt lighter, because she wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. That night she sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by silence. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind. It was softer. She pulled out the letter from Kevin Thompson, the blonde attacker. She read it again. "I'm sorry. You showed restraint when you didn't have to. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you taught me a lesson I'll never forget." She folded it carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and whispered into the dark, "Maybe people really can change." The weeks that followed brought more invitations. Some she accepted, some she declined. She spoke at veteran support groups, schools, small community gatherings. She never talked about the fight. She talked about the silence after, the loneliness, the hidden battles. And people listened. One evening, she found herself standing in a high school gymnasium. Teenagers slouched in bleachers, skeptical at first. But when she told them the truth, that courage wasn't about fists or medals, but about standing up when you felt broken, something shifted. By the end, even the most restless students sat still, listening. Afterward, a girl approached shyly, no more than 16. "My brother came back from Afghanistan last year," she said softly. "He doesn't talk to anyone, not even me, but I think if he heard you, maybe he would." Sarah knelt, meeting the girl's eyes. "Tell him he's not alone, even when it feels like it." The girl nodded, tears trembling at the corners of her eyes. Moments like that reminded Sarah why she kept saying yes, not for applause, not for recognition, but for connection, for the chance that her pain could ease someone else. Yet still, in the quiet of her own nights, she wrestled with doubt. Would she ever truly be free of the 15 seconds? Would people ever see her beyond it? One evening, Jep pulled her aside at the restaurant. His eyes were kind, his voice low. "Do you know why people keep calling you a hero?" She sighed, "Because they saw a video." "No," he said firmly, "because you could have destroyed those men, and instead you chose mercy. That is the strength they see, not the fight, the choice." Sarah sat back, stunned by the simplicity of it. Mercy. That word followed her home that night. It echoed in her mind as she fell asleep. It softened the edges of her doubt. Maybe Jep was right. Maybe she wasn't chained to 15 seconds. Maybe she was defined by what she chose in those 15 seconds. Not the violence, the restraint. And maybe, just maybe, that was the story she was meant to tell. Why did the real battles always come when you thought you'd already survived the war? Months had passed since Sarah first stood before a microphone, speaking not about combat, but about coming home. Since then, she had spoken at more schools, veteran groups, and even corporate gatherings. The world no longer only saw her as the woman from the video. They were beginning to see her as something else, someone who could give voice to struggles most people never named aloud. But with recognition came pressure. Invitations stacked up. Reporters still called. Her boss encouraged her to lean into the spotlight, to use it as a platform for the company's image. Sarah resisted. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't a brand. Still, she couldn't ignore the messages that mattered, the quiet ones. Letters from young soldiers trying to adjust. Emails from mothers who finally understood why their sons sat silently at family dinners. Students who admitted they were scared of life after graduation but felt braver after hearing her speak. These were the voices that pulled her forward. One evening, Sarah attended a small veteran support meeting at a local church. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. A circle of folding chairs held men and women from every era: Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, even a few from more recent deployments. Some spoke openly. Others sat with arms folded, silent but listening. Sarah shared her story carefully, not of the restaurant but of the quiet battles after. When she finished, an older man with a weathered face leaned forward. "You talk about restraint," he said slowly. "But what happens when restraint feels like weakness? What happens when the world keeps pushing and you're tired of being the bigger person?" The question lingered, heavy in the air. Sarah didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Then the choice isn't easy, but that's what makes it powerful. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can fight. But holding back, choosing mercy, that's harder. And sometimes that's what changes people more than violence ever could." The man nodded, though his eyes stayed troubled. Sarah felt the weight of her own words pressing inside her chest. She believed them, but did she live them? Or was she still defined by the part of her that reacted fast and precise when threatened? Her answer came sooner than she expected. 2 weeks later, Sarah left work late. The city streets were dim, the air cool. She walked to her car in the underground garage, her footsteps echoing. The place was almost empty. Then she heard it, a shuffle, the faint scrape of shoes. Her body tensed instantly, instincts sharp as ever. She turned, scanning the shadows. A figure stepped out, then another, 2 men blocking her path. Her pulse quickened, but her face remained calm. "Evening," one said, his voice low, mocking. Sarah said nothing. Her eyes tracked their movements. "You're the Navy woman, right? The one from the video." Her stomach dropped, the recognition again. Always the video, always the 15 seconds. "What do you want?" she asked, voice steady. The taller one smirked. "Just wanted to see if you're really as tough as they say. Maybe you just got lucky that night." Sarah exhaled slowly. Old instincts screamed at her: measure distance, identify threats, strike first if needed. But something inside her shifted. She remembered the words she had spoken at the support group: mercy, restraint. She didn't want another fight. "I'm leaving," she said firmly. Step aside." The men glanced at each other, then laughed. One moved closer, too close. "Or what? You'll break us too." Her jaw tightened. Her muscles coiled. Every fiber of her wanted to end it before it began. But she froze in place, forcing herself to choose differently. "Walk away," she said, her voice cutting through the empty garage. "Because if you don't, I promise you'll regret it. And this time there won't be cameras to protect you." Her eyes locked on his, unflinching, unwavering. Not rage, not fear, pure certainty. The laughter faltered. The taller man hesitated, shifting his weight. His bravado cracked. Finally, with a muttered curse, they turned and disappeared into the shadows. Sarah stood alone, heart pounding, breath sharp. She waited, listening, making sure they were gone. Then she let her body relax just slightly. For the first time, she had chosen not to fight, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't have to. And the realization hit her harder than any blow ever had. She got into her car, sat with her hands on the steering wheel, and whispered into the silence, "That's who I want to be." Later that week, she told the story carefully at another gathering. She didn't name the men, didn't dramatize. She just said, "Someone tried to test me again, and I chose not to fight, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then a young veteran in the back raised his hand. "That's harder than anything," he said softly. Sarah nodded. "Yes, it is." And as the group broke into quiet applause, not thunderous, not demanding, but understanding, Sarah felt a shift deep inside. The 15 seconds in the restaurant no longer defined her. The restraint in the garage did. And for the first time since she had come home, she felt like she was finally W. Why did endings never feel final, only like another beginning? It had been nearly a year since the restaurant. Nearly a year since 15 seconds had thrust Sarah Martinez into a spotlight she never wanted. In that time, she had stood on stages, in classrooms, in support groups, telling truths most people had never heard spoken. She had faced more eyes than she ever imagined, but also more gratitude. And slowly, she had begun to heal. The city still remembered her. Jep's restaurant was still full every night. The plaque still sat on her table, reserved for heroes. People still approached her sometimes, their voices full of awe, but something had shifted. They no longer asked only about the fight. They asked about life after, about resilience, about silence. And Sarah gave them answers, not rehearsed ones, honest ones. She told them about sleepless nights, about the loneliness of transition, about the weight of being called a hero when all you wanted was peace. She told them about mercy, about the choice to walk away when fighting would be easier. And people listened, really listened. The video that once defined her had been buried under new ones. Clips of her speaking, clips of her comforting young veterans, clips of her standing quietly at ceremonies, her hands folded, her presence steady. But to her, the most important moments were the ones off camera. Like the night she sat across from a 22-year-old Marine who admitted he was afraid to leave his apartment. Sarah listened, nodded, and said softly, "You're not broken, you're adjusting, and adjustment takes time." Or the afternoon she visited a high school, where a girl hugged her and whispered, "You made me believe I can be strong without pretending I'm not scared." Or the time she found herself back at the pier, staring at the endless horizon, realizing she no longer felt the ache of being defined by 15 seconds. She felt something else instead, belonging. Her job as a security consultant continued. She was good at it, but it was never the center of her life. The center was the people, the connections, the quiet moments when she could use her experience not to break, but to build. One evening, Jep held a small gathering at his restaurant. Not a ceremony, not a staged event, just a dinner. Veterans, families, friends. Sarah sat at her usual table, surrounded by laughter, by warmth. Mike, the young waiter, now a little older, carried plates with confidence. The air was alive but peaceful. At one point, Jep tapped his glass for quiet. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. "I tell this story often," he said, glancing toward Sarah. "The night she showed us all what true strength looks like. But tonight, I don't want to tell it again. Because tonight, she has shown us something greater. That strength is not what you do in 15 seconds. It is what you do in the days, the months, the years after." He lifted his glass. To Sarah, to peace, to restraint. The room echoed softly, to Sarah. She lowered her head, embarrassed, but this time she didn't resist it, because she understood. They weren't applauding the fight anymore. They were applauding what came after. Later, as the night wound down, an elderly veteran approached her. His steps were slow, his hands calloused. He shook hers firmly, his voice rough with age. "You gave them mercy," he said simply. "That's something I couldn't always do, and it's something I wish I had learned sooner. Thank you." Sarah held his gaze, her eyes burning. She nodded once. When the evening ended, she stepped outside. The San Diego night was calm, the air cool. The stars stretched endless above the city lights. She walked toward the pier, the place she always went when she needed clarity. Standing at the railing, she breathed deep, the salt air sharp in her lungs. She thought of the restaurant, of the 5 men, of the chaos, and then she thought of everything since, the people she had met, the voices she had heard, the mercy she had chosen. For the first time, she felt no weight in remembering, only acceptance. She wasn't the viral video. She wasn't just Petty Officer Martinez. She wasn't only the consultant or the speaker or the reluctant hero. She was all of it, and she was more. Sarah closed her eyes, whispered to the waves, "I'm home." The ocean carried her words away, soft and endless. And in the quiet she understood. Strength wasn't the fight. Strength was knowing when to fight and when not to. Strength was mercy. Strength was restraint. Sometimes dignity didn't speak. It didn't shout. It didn't seek applause. It simply acted. And that, Sarah knew, was her story.